Shake up at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning, Ryan. It's okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as
Thanks,
simple
Ryan.
as 1,
What's
2,
up?
3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
What's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
Hey everyone, I'm Angie Miller. Welcome to Strong Mind, Strong Body. Today we are going to talk about a very strong emotion that is not unfamiliar to any of us as human beings, and it is anger. Anger is just an emotion, one of many, but sometimes it can really stand in our way. So my guest today is Dr. Nilda Perez. She is a behavioral health expert and the perfect person, in my opinion, to talk about anger. So we are going to talk about the far-reaching impacts of anger and how this powerful emotion actually impacts your body, it strains your relationships, and can ripple through society. Dr. Nilda is going to talk about the physiological changes anger triggers and how it erodes our closest connections. Hopefully, you're going to discover why seemingly isolated incidents like road rage are symptoms of a much broader episode. So I'm glad that you joined me today on this Strong Mind, Strong Body episode called How Anger Sabotages Your Health and Relationships. And I'm going to bring in Dr. Nilda and have her introduce herself, or at least say hello. How you doing, Nilda?
Oh, wow. Hello, how are you? How's everything going?
I am doing very well. And you are in Florida, I understand, and I'm here in Charlotte, correct?
I am, yes.
All right. Is it bright and sunny there today?
Bright and sunny today. I think the next couple of days is going to be cloudy and rainy.
All right. Getting prepared for that.
Mhm.
So I know it's Nilda Perez, but you want me to call you Dr. Nilda. Is that correct?
Yes.
All
Yes.
right. Awesome. So, Dr. Nilda, you've mentioned that anger, you and I have talked, and you've said anger can be contagious. And I think that's really interesting because I think emotion in general can be contagious. If someone starts crying, I start crying. It's almost like it's a mirror image thing, but also the empath in me. But how is anger contagious? Can you walk us through how one person's road rage might spark this chain of aggression?
Yes, absolutely. So anger is an aggression that is contagious. We know that. So like all emotions, right? We process emotions, and if one person is feeling a certain, it's energy, right? And if one person is feeling something, like anger or rage, it's gonna automatically be felt by everyone around them, or at least everyone who they're impacting. So, so the emotional stages, they get transferred without awareness. Like we're not even aware that we're feeling that rage, or we're feeling that anger that this other person is kind of spewing out at us, right? So it just kind of it's contagious in the way that if someone is going to lash out at me, automatically, even if I'm off guard, or it's automatically going to spark up that anger in us. So when one person has road rage, what we're not knowing, right, is that this person is driving crazy, cutting people off, but we don't know what's going on in that person's life.
Mhm.
So this person is in a car by themselves, isolated, and their mind is going. And they're thinking of, hey, I may get laid off, and I'm having problems with my wife, and my kid is going bonkers. And they're in this isolated box, feeling all of these emotions, realize that they just almost missed their stop, and they're going like they don't care who they cut off because they can't be late to work. So I'm in another car having no idea what's going on with the other person, but now they cut me off. They put my life at risk. And here, automatically, the anger is sparked in me, and it can ruin my entire day.
Right. Well, it's interesting. I have a story to tell you, and I'm a little sheepish admitting it. But this morning I was driving back from Asheville, North Carolina, and two cars were on the highway, and they were neck and neck with each other, so kind of staying side by side for a very long period of time. And I was frustrated because I used the left lane as a passing lane, and so I did something I'm not proud of, and I got in the left lane and sort of, might have blinked my lights a couple of times, like, "Hey, man, like this is the passing lane. Can we move a bit?" Well, it instigated some unfavorable behavior in that car, in the human, that came back to me as fear-based. The behavior and the reaction seemed out of context to me, sort of blinking my lights a couple of times. And it really made me step back and say, was that worth it, Angie? Was that worth it? Like, no matter
Mhm.
the hurry or the things going on in my mind or whatever I might have been processing, we always have to
Exactly.
remember that emotion is contagious. That if I am perceived as doing something aggressive, that person is going to react in likeness. And so,
Absolutely.
we are all our emotions are not separate from everyone else, because our behavior is a result of our emotions, and people are going to pick up on that, and it's going to keep going down the chain. So I just thought that would be a perfect example, not one I'm proud of, but worth mentioning. So, we talk about the fight or flight response, but I would love if you could tell us what's actually happening in our bodies when we get consumed by anger.
Okay, awesome. So when we're consumed by anger, we're at a heightened state of arousal. So due to the activation of, the sympathetic nervous system. That's kind of like the big way of explaining it. So to break it down, during this process, there are several physiological things that are going on. The body is releasing stress hormones, particularly the adrenaline and the cortisol, which we already know that those are the things that are beginning to happen now in our body. Chronic anger, though, it leads to heightened levels of cortisol. Now, when you live this way, you live in this heightened state of arousal, eventually your immune system gets suppressed. It physiologically, it's going to happen. And we're noticing that now our immune system is being affected. We're getting sick. Our heart rate and our blood pressure are going up. These are the things that continue to happen because we stay in this heightened state of emotions, right? The flight or fight, or those are things that happen. Like this is how, because individuals are different, some people would fight. Some people would try to ignore it, but that doesn't mean that all of this stuff is not going on in our body.
Right.
These things are still happening. So what happens is over time, it starts affecting the brain. And eventually our decision making and our emotional regulation is off. We start seeing the effects of anger on the brain, the effects of anger on our bodies, the effects of anger on what's going on, the way we interact with people. So we can do one of two things. We could either isolate, or we become enraged and angry at the smallest things that typically wouldn't even bother us.
Yeah. Isn't that so true? And I did a podcast episode a couple years ago on amygdala hijack, and how, when you get into that stress response, and, that amygdala hijack where you seemingly have lost all rational thought, and you're
Right.
just reacting instead of responding, and
Mhm.
how it can happen so quickly. And to your point, then it's almost like over time, we have no emotional regulation. And then, to your point, that affects heart rate, blood pressure, all the physiological changes that happen within the body. And it creates illness, and not just
Yeah.
physical illness, but illness in our relationships. Because those
Oh,
who are
yeah.
constantly angry and having these amygdala hijacks and are emotionally dysregulated, people around them learn not to trust them anymore, because they never know what they're going to get.
Exactly, exactly. And go to the point of the fight or flight. Sometimes people may not fight, and their tendency is to like not address things, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to affect your relationship, or it's not going to affect your physiological. It's going to affect your brain. It's going to affect your health, even if you're not addressing it. So people address things differently, but that doesn't mean that it's not physiologically affecting you, and it doesn't mean that it's not going to affect your relationships.
Well,
This,
100%, because think about suppression. Think about the boiling
Mhm.
pot. The more you put the lid on the boiling pot and you say, don't think about the boiling pot, don't think about the boiling pot, the more you're keeping it.
Exactly, exactly.
You say, don't think about chocolate. Okay, I'm not going to think about chocolate. And so
Right.
that, I don't want to think about this because it's uncomfortable, but you have to consciously not think about something. And so that too takes wear and tear on the body. When I went
Exactly.
to that amygdala hijack, I kind of hijacked this, but do you have anything else you want to say about that? How that, what happens when you're in that kind of fight or flight with the amygdala hijack?
What happens is that, again, this is just starts affecting your physiological. It affects areas of your brain that you don't even realize what it's doing, and it clouds your thinking, it clouds your decision making, it clouds your emotional regulation. You even people that don't necessarily fight back are will fight in within their sphere of comfort with their children or with their husband. It just affects everything around you.
Yeah.
So yeah, physiologically it has a huge impact. And oftentimes people don't realize it because right now we're living in a time where we live in this heightened stress, and
Right.
we've become accustomed to it.
We really have. I do think that. I think that it's gone next level. And I think,
Oh
going
yeah.
back to amygdala hijack, I think it's just that the way I always describe it is like your rational thought goes offline. It just you go offline. You don't have
Yeah.
an ability to tap into your rational thought. But it is so
Mhm.
true. We live in a heightened state of kind of things going as quickly as possible. And when things go
Right.
quickly, I think that it amps our adrenaline and that we are more
Yes.
reactive. And so
Yes.
we definitely do. But you had also told me that like anger can be a source of strength or motivation. Like some people feel like they can pull from anger, like, well, anger is a strong emotion and it motivates me. But in your professional opinion, is there ever a scenario where anger is actually beneficial to our health or our relationships?
Yes. It Anger helps us to be able to make the decision to set boundaries. So, boundary setting. There are instances that you have to be angry. You're angry with something that's unjust, something that's unjust to you, to your family, to anybody. So there are areas where we can become angry, but angry and out of control are not necessarily the same. So we need to be able to decipher that. Yes, of course, it's perfectly normal to get angry. A person who never gets angry, that's just not normal. They're suppressing the anger. But it's absolutely normal to be able to be angry and not be reactive or destructive.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I didn't know what your answer was going to be to that, and I know that I personally would answer the same way. From the work that I do, I would say absolutely, because sometimes, especially with those people who are very used to suppressing and
Mhm.
sort of not being clear with their emotions, especially in situations with couples where someone is very dysregulated persistently with anger and strong emotion, the other person is likely to shut down because they learn early on you can't meet resistance with resistance. That doesn't mean that there's not underlying anger and maybe even
Oh
some
yeah.
rage
Oh
because it's
yeah.
in response to all of this that makes them feel out of control. So, yes, I do think that sometimes it takes us finally tapping into our own anger and not suppressing it and saying, this can't go
Mhm.
on this way. I need to set some healthy boundaries, or I need to respond to this because this is an injustice to the way that I am functioning in my life. And so I agree, it can have
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
place. It's just
E-
not an excuse to be dysregulated in likeness to the other person.
Exactly. Like we need to be able to decipher the difference between anger and rage. They're
Yeah.
they're not necessarily one and the same. You can be angry and be able to address things without going into a rage. So
Yeah.
we need to be able to separate those, but we've kind of blended them together, and we feel that the only time that somebody is angry is when they're in a rage, and that's out of control.
Right.
to
Exactly.
be able to have that balance. But anger is perfectly natural. It's an emotion like any other emotion. So it's perfectly natural to be angry. But how are you going to control that anger,
Mhm.
get what you need and want, and be able to move on without it being destructive to your health and to your relationships?
Yeah, and without it shutting down the other person, right? Without it anger being like a badge of honor or a I know I'm right because I'm this
Right.
angry about it. So, Dr. Nilda, I want to reintroduce you. So, I'm Angie Miller. This is Strong Mind, Strong Body. I'm talking to Dr. Nilda Perez, and we're talking about how anger sabotages your health and your relationship, and just the kind of pervasive societal impact of anger, because we do think it's out there is a lot more road rage and just aggression overall, and so that does one person's anger affects the people that they're closest to, which affects the people that those people go to work with, and so it filters through society. So Dr.
Mhm.
Nilda, I want to ask you, we're living in this age of kind of online outrage and cancel culture and all those things, and you and I, we're not going to walk down that dark path of whether we think cancel culture is the right thing or the wrong thing. That's not where I'm going here. But there is
Mhm.
a lot of online vitriol, if you will. It's easy to be a hater in front of a keyboard. But how is this constant exposure to anger driven content affecting our mental health collectively and our ability to form meaningful relationships? That's a big question, I know, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a very sad time right now that we're living in because we hide behind a keyboard, but this is causing so much division between good, solid relationships with friends and even families. I've seen families that have totally divided with this cancel culture. I've seen people that, because they don't agree on one thing, they feel that they can be disrespectful and not and cut people off. And that's such a sad, we're living in a very sad time because we're allowing these things to disrupt us. Allowing this to disrupt our relationships. And this is just, it's increasing stress. There's a lot more anxiety. I remember I started as a therapist 29 years ago, and the heightened anxiety and depression is off the roof now. It's unbelievable, and it's just making it harder to maintain meaningful relationships because we're very entitled and believe that if people don't agree with us, then we can't have a relationship. So just to give you a short scenario, I was talking to one of the kids that I've worked with in the past, and they presented something to me and said, "Well, I need to know whether or not you agree with this." And I said, "Do you want to know if I agree with it because you want my opinion, or do you want to know if I agree with it so that you can decide whether or not you want to like be my friend or have a relationship?" Um, they were like kind of confused. They didn't see it as two separate things. I said, because we need to agree sometimes to disagree. We can still love and respect one another, but we need to know where to draw the line and it's okay to disagree. And we can still maintain a relationship for all the other things that we agree on. And my point to the person was, I may not agree with you, but here's the thing, you don't agree with me. So should I write you off because you don't agree with me? We just don't agree on this point. That doesn't mean that we can't maintain a relationship. Does that
I
make
love
sense?
that question. I love that question. Do you want to know because you want to know my opinion, or do you want to know because it's going to impact whether or not we can move forward in this relationship? What a powerful question, and what I mean, what a great question and a great story. Because what if we ask that question more often? Because sometimes it does feel like what I call a double bind, where I'm not allowed. You're if you do and you're if you don't. So if you answer this way, then you're going to upset them because you think differently. But if you answer this
Right.
and you're going to upset yourself because you feel like you're selling out because you're not being honest. And so I think that's such a powerful way of saying and helping people differentiate between the fact that We're not going to ask people what they think just because we want to get into an argument with them. We're not here to
Right.
change other people. We're here to live our best lives and know that that's why this whole, you and I got into a conversation, and I've had this conversation with so many people on my show, this whole just get rid of toxic people. And it's all over like the internet. It's all over TikTok. It's all
Yeah.
Instagram. And all I can think is, what do you mean get rid of toxic people? Because we're all toxic and to certain
Right.
people at certain times. And so are you just going to build this utopian world where you're only surrounded by people who agree with you? Lacks such meaning and such a profound way of learning how to relate to one another in this world, whether or not we agree. So,
Right. And here's the thing, we could never agree on everything.
yeah.
But if our relationship is solid enough that we can agree on most things, that's good enough. We're never going to agree 100%, but we've almost like created an entitled society that feels that if you cannot agree with me 100%, then we can't have a relationship. And it's impossible. We're completely different individuals who have completely different well, not completely different, but we have our differences, and we need to be okay with that. It needs to be okay for you to disagree with me. I have my point of view, you have your point of view, I respect you, you respect me. And on this point, maybe we can't talk about this, but we have so much more.
Mhm.
But this has just gotten, this cancel society has just, cancel culture has just become, you know what? It's isolating. And unfortunately, I feel that the pandemic just just threw another wrench in this, and just so sad.
Well, and I was thinking on a smaller scale. I'll never forget. My daughter was in high school. We were at this game, and this her friend was dating this young man, and the mom of the young lady said, "Oh, they have the cutest relationship. They never ever fight." And she walked away,
Mm.
and I turned around to my girlfriend, and I was like, "Well, that's a recipe for disaster." And
Right.
we always joke. I always bring that up to my daughter and remind her, and that young couple is not together anymore. But I said, what is it about our world that people think that if you don't fight, you must have a perfect relationship? I'm like, well,
Yeah,
I've never had a relationship where there's not disagreement, because
of
disagreement means
course.
we're autonomous humans and we see the world differently, and we are going to then run into situations where we disagree, hopefully, right? I think
Hmm.
that's a healthy.
Exactly.
So I have
Exactly.
a question for you.
Yeah.
If anger is so detrimental to our health and our relationships, why do you think that humans cling to it? I will say one thing on this one. I think that for some people who are addicted to anger, it just seems to me like they have learned early on that it is a power emotion, and they feel it gives them power, because when they throw it out there, everyone runs away with their tail between their legs because it is such a strong emotion. But what are your thoughts on? I mean, that's a small segment of it, but I do think that humans seem to cling to it. And, are we addicted to our own rage?
Yeah, to your point, anger does give a sense of control, power, and validation. But simultaneously, it also isolates, divides, and can completely destroy relationships. So you can be angry and destructive once, maybe twice, but if this is habitual, people are going to start staying away from you. So again, what is the point? If your rage and your anger that is giving you this temporary, because it's only temporary control and power, if this becomes habitual, then you're going to realize that you're going to be more and more isolated day after day until you've ruined and burnt every bridge in every relationship, and that's just not worth it. We need to learn how to going back to the point, you need to agree to disagree. Remember that anger and rage, right? Because you can be angry. Remember, we've talked about that. We can be angry, but when it comes to being angry and disrespectful and in a rage, then that just changes things. And honestly, it just becomes a blame game. You're blaming other people for your anger. You're blaming other people for the way that you feel, and it's unfair. We need to each take responsibility. So to build long-term relationships, we need to understand that um, we have to learn how to control ourselves. See, there's power in control with being angry and not having an outburst. There
Well,
is a
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I always say, I tell my daughters and everyone who will listen, my clients, I think one of the best ways to keep your power is to stay regulated among dysregulation. And so for me, sometimes that means stepping out of the room, opening up the notes app on my phone and journaling what just happened so that I can get rid of everything that I want to say, but I know
yes,
better to say in that moment because I hold
exactly.
power by keeping myself regulated. And so dysregulation is just getting into the mud with the other person and no one ever gets anywhere. But Dr. Nilda, you brought something up. And as I close the show, I'm glad you brought it up because you and I are actually kind of doing a two-part series here. And our next part of our series is going to be the blame game. And it is often in response to anger, which is, I'm not angry. You made me angry. And so
Right.
listening to Strong Mind, Strong Body today. I really appreciate you coming on and listening to this whole big topic about anger. Dr. Nilda, thank you for joining us. And I really appreciate your expertise. And we will see you all next week.